Hi, Joe.
Hey, what's going on, Steve? How are you, man?
I'm good, man. Before we talk about Trust Records, which is definitely one of the most interesting things going on right now in music, in my opinion, can you please give my listeners a little background on your history in music? Because I know you've been involved in the business for a long time, management, merchandising,
Yeah,
labels, musician, everything. Tell us all about yourself and how you get started. And you're from California, right?
right. Yeah. I'm born in Huntington Beach, California, which is down in Orange County, and also the home of like some great bands like TSOL and Fullerton had Social Distortion, Adolescence, etc. I
Uniform
mean,
choice.
Uniform Choices from Found. Yeah, Uniform Choices. The Dubars grew up right down the street from me. That's how what really accelerated me into punk rock. But I mean, the story for me musically starts, I think, like any of us as a kid, like as a teenager, young teenager, finding punk rock, finding those bands I just mentioned, meeting the Uniform Choice guys, uh, discovering Minor Threat and SSD and kind of the straight edge part. I'm 52. Today's actually my birthday. So we're
Happy
doing this on my
birthday.
birthday. Yeah,
Happy
thanks.
birthday.
Thanks, bud. So anyway, so the point is like, like that kind of, I always say that music saved my life, like music in general saved my life. And it gave me an identity as a teenager. It helped me as like, I think all of us like gravitating towards that hardcore punk rock scene, especially in the 80s, which is the sweet spot for me. Like, it got me into music and I followed that ever since. I graduated college with a history major because I thought I was going to be a history teacher, but
Which
that never
college
happened.
what college did you go to?
Long Beach State.
Oh,
I
cool.
went to a community college and then Long Beach State, which is anyway. But the point is like out of high school, I was a roadie in quotes where I toured with like the band Instead, which is a straight edge band from Anaheim.
Wishing Well Records.
Yep,
Yep.
Wishing Well Records, and then I toured with Quicksand. Was really uh I started touring with Quicksand early, like on like 93 through 95, I think. And that's what I did. And I was all kind of like in the road crew mentality of like, I'm just going to become a tour manager and this is so fun. And then, I just, as a 20-year-old, you're kind of waver back and forth. Like, should I do this? Should I finish college? And I finished college. I still miss music. And then I worked for Revelation Records. I worked for Victory Records. And then I got into management for a little bit with a guy named Ted Gardner, who's famous for managing Jane's Addiction. He started Lollapalooza with Perry Farrell. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. And so he was great. He was a real mentor. We managed Brian Jonestown Massacre, the Aquabats, a band called In a Way, and Echo and the Bunnymen when they came to North America. Those
Wow.
were ours. And then from there, I mean, this is such a journey. I went into merchandising and music merchandising. I did that for about 20 years. And that was kind of my career. I started off, just as like anyone else, like with a small merchandise company. And then I kind of rose up to like a biz dev role where you sign bands. And I mean, the bands I'm most proud of signing were kind of Run the Jewels and this band Phanogram and Leon Bridges. But I got to a point, like in anything, when you're like getting older, I just said my birthday day, I turned 52. Like you get kind of put out to pasture in your late 40s in the music business, unless you really are in it. Like you have like, you're like, Michael Rapino or some dude who's running Live Nation. Like, yeah, I could kind of see the writing on the wall, and I didn't really want to start up my own merchandising company. I was making too much money at that level. So like, it's hard, it's hard to get a job if you get, and what happened to me is I got laid off. And then I was lucky enough, Matt Pincus and I, the other co-founder of Trust, we had been talking about Trust Records, the label, doing it for a couple of years before that kind of happened to me. And as that happened, I was like, all right, man, like, let's do it, Matt, let's do it.
So you have a wide background, a wide
oh yeah,
range of things that you've done. That's fantastic. You also came along at a time where the whole record industry by the end of the 90s was ready to collapse. I mean, the major labels and everything changed.
oh yeah. Well, you would know, you were
Yeah.
you were in this, right?
Yeah, I was working in A&M Records when things
Yeah.
kind of went down the toilet there. So you and Matt Pincus got together and you formed Trust, which is a nonprofit organization, which I find really interesting.
Yeah, let me just start you. I'll clarify. It's a nonprofit in theory. It's not a technical 502 nonprofit. So I don't want to ever get that distinction that we're filed as a nonprofit, but we operate as a nonprofit in the sense that Matt's the benefactor of the label. Anything we make from the label just goes into the label.
Got it. Okay. And your goal was to preserve the history of some of the great punk
Yep.
and hardcore releases, and you're 2 for 2, far as I can tell, with the Circle Jerks, Group
Thanks.
Sex, and 7 Seconds to Crew. Can you elaborate a little more about how the whole thing really got rolling?
Yeah, sure. So Matt and I have been friends, and I kind of told you my story about childhood and stuff. That Matt would tell you the same story. You know, he's from New York. I'm from Los Angeles, basically, and he played bass in a band called Judge, which is a New York hardcore band, and we became friends years ago through. I'm great friends with all those New York guys from that era, of that youth crew movement, they call it, and he's one of them. And he started a publishing company about 20 years ago. It was called Songs Publishing, and it was an independent publisher, and they had Lord and Pharrell and The Weeknd and Diplo and Matt and his A&R team. I mean, they were really in front of it with some of this. As music changed, they really got into it. And he recognized songwriting and publishing was the real revenue stream for artists. And I think he wanted to do an independent publisher that was really artist friendly, because that's how he kind of rolls. Through that company, Songs, we did a nonprofit called Know Your Rights, which was, we were kind of going to some of the hardcore bands that we're working with now and saying, like, look, everything's gone into a streaming world, and why don't we, Matt's got this company and we can use it as the muscle and just do it for free. Like, we'll get your publishing in order. You get, make sure if there's Spotify money, it's going to be micro pennies, but it's your money, and let's try to collect that for you. And in doing that, Matt kind of recognized there's a real disconnect for the music we're talking about, this punk rock hardcore of the 80s and 70s, and not just punk rock, but all genres. There's a lot of trouble transitioning into this digital age that we're going to. And he thought at the time, the Cro-Mags Age of Quarrel, this, Dag Nasty Field Day, which is a record you worked on, and as we know, and SSD, Kids Will Have Their Say. Those are records we were like, hey man, what happens when these guys die? It's just going to be lost in the ethos. Are we really going to lose SSD, Kids Will Have Their Say, like for future generations once these guys are gone? And it was a real, concern of his. And the thing about Matt is, I mean, he's no bullshit. Like, if he's sincere about something, it's not an act. He was sincere about it. And he was like, why don't you run it? I can pay, we'll pay you a little bit. It'll scale it as we're doing, and I was like, okay, I'm kind of at a point in my life where I could dip into my savings a little bit and live, it's a scary proposition financially, starting a hardcore record label in 2022. But Matt is generous, and he's been a great partner, and he's concerned. His juice is getting this label on a trajectory where it just becomes the automated space for these records and these artists. Like, once we feel like we get enough of a canon together, like enough of a roster, we could really be the one-stop shop to kind of preserve all this music. And the idea is to try to get it into the digital space any way possible, so it has some sort of traction. Because I mean, you're part of this music business. Like, The Weeknd will have 1 billion streams on a new single. 7 Seconds, which is one of the bands, Young Till I Dies, the single we put out, it's got like, I don't know where it's at now, but at one point it was like almost like, I think like 40,000 streams. And we were like, great, that's great. But the idea is like, how do we get this stuff? Like, Circle Jerks is in the millions of streams with their singles. And that's kind of the goal. Like, how do we help these artists get to that point where at least their hit songs, or their, quote hit songs, are streaming at a level where they get traction, the algorithms kick in. When you're looking at other bands, they get recommended to you, because that's how that kind of system works, right? Like, it's like, they don't notice you unless you've got some traction on your own. So that's what we're doing with Trust. Yes, there's a physical component to it, which we can talk about, but the overall goal is to make sure when all the vinyl and all that shit goes away, that streaming, which will be the future, whether we like it or not, is protected for these artists, that their art is protected in that space.
It's interesting what you're saying about publishing, because it wasn't until I started managing bands in the early 2000s that I would point out to bands, your publishing is the most important thing. Because when I started in the 80s, all the independent deals we did were 50-50 publishing splits. And these days, that's a no-no, you know. But
Yeah.
back then, bands had no choice because you were handed a contract and you had to give up 50% of your publishing to the label. Pretty much all the labels I worked for at that time before I went to a major operated that way. Well, most all the ones I did.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's really good that you guys are looking out for the band's publishing and all that, because nobody really did that for the first 20 years of independent labels, you know?
No, and to your point, and then no, and why would any of these guys even think that way? I mean, if we were, you know, like we're from the same era, like independent music in the 80s, bands are just happy to play shows and get
Yeah.
you got a record out, like 7 Seconds getting a record out, like they don't even think about the money part of it. There's not even a thought, because it's like there's no future in it. These guys are all like, hey, we're doing our band and we got a record out, we can tour. And so that stuff got neglected and kind of and forgot, you know. And to be honest, like, I mean, you know this, being in the music business, publishing is a very hard thing to figure out.
Yeah, it is.
And Matt's an expert on it. He's fluent in it.
Yeah.
And without like, but I've been working with him for years on this, and I still sometimes I'm like, wait, what? How does this work? Like, how are we splitting this money? And especially when you start collecting the revenue through the digital platforms, like we just did our first royalty payments for the label in this year, and I was eye-opening to me, Steve, because I hadn't done the label side at that level. So looking at all the streaming data coming in and saying like, wait, like this $2.20 goes here, we split it up this, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's the stuff where it's a little bit eye-opening, but I feel like for the artists that were with us, like they're in a good spot because we are aware of that and our eyes are on that.
You're looking out for them.
Yeah.
And, you know, licensing 100%. Has become bigger than ever. When I talk about this part of licensing, I'm talking about TV, commercials, films, that sort of thing. You can make a lot of money now, or you have been able to make a lot of money the last 20 years or so. Before that, they would go after all the big artists and try and get them. And the little artists would get the $1,000 that they had left over. Now it's a new ball game, you know. You get on a T-Mobile commercial, you get a lot of money for it. I love the way that you guys are doing your packaging. And you know, Chris Morris was, he had all the liner notes and stuff in the, I think it was the Circle Jerks record.
Wild in the Streets. Yeah, he did a great job.
And he's a great, you know, I've known Chris for a long time. I think what you're doing here is it's an artistic form that seemed to get lost when we started making CDs and then everything went digital. I'm happy to see someone that looks at a record as an artistic thing rather than just like, oh, it's just a record. Because to me, it's more about the art, you know? Yeah,
I agree. Thank you. And I'm thank you for noticing that, because that is very conscious on our end. Because when we started doing this label before, you know, it was just kind of an idea. The idea was it would be a digital label. Like, we didn't think about the physical because Matt, we're so like forward thinking, like, okay, how do we get these bands in digital streaming? But then, to my point, you know, when you start looking at the streams compared to like, you know, The Weeknd compared to like 7 Seconds, well, 7 Seconds, you can't give 7 Seconds fair value for their masters based on just streaming.
Right? Exactly.
And then the other idea is like, what are we really trying to do is preserve the culture. And to your point, like a guy like Chris Morris, like those of your listeners who don't know Chris Morris is a great writer. He's a music writer, LA Weekly, LA
fan,
Times.
a big fan too.
Yeah, and just knows music. He's written a couple books. I think he wrote a book on Los Lobos that's great. And then he did the liner notes for Wild in the Streets. But those are the kind of people that you want to bring back into the fold, because when you start looking, especially punk rock and hardcore, it's not only just the bands. Like, the bands are obviously the driver, but you got great photographers. You got Glennie Friedman, you got Ed Culver, you got, you know, Alison Braun. And down the line, and then you got writers like Chris Morris, and then you have like all these fanzines. We've been kind of curating fanzines in our releases. So like on 7 Seconds especially, we always get a couple of fanzines and show like some of the spreads, because that's the whole spirit of that scene. And I think it all kind of works in harmony together to help the art just kind of be an elevated space. We look at it like we're trying to do everything we're trying to do. We're trying to make it an art, we're trying to put, like I say, in an art space. Albro would kill me. But, I mean, I don't think he'd kill me, but I just laugh because SSD is one of the bands we can talk about. We're starting to work with, but they have that song, How Much Art?
How much art can you take?
I know. The point is like, I want 7 Seconds and Circle Jerks to be in a museum. That's where I see them. Like, I see them in the Smithsonian. I see that kind of American culture that this scene is from being as important as jazz or blues or folk in the American lexicon. So that's how we work. So that's why we try to put as much care into it. You know, we license photos from like Glenn. Like, I just have to give some shout outs to two photographers like Glenn E. Friedman and Ed Culver. Those guys have been nothing but generous with their work. And that's a difference maker, because we don't got a lot of money to just be licensing photos all the time. So anyway, yes, thank you for noticing that. But that is very intentional to like, okay, how do we always make these records be in an elevated artistic space where the packaging is beautiful and you're looking at it and you're learning about the band. You're also learning about this music they made. You have some sort of background to it. If you're a young kid and you pick up a 7 Seconds or Circle Jerks record, you could read the booklets that we provide and learn about the context of why this music's great, because these kids are rebelling against a different time. You know, the spirit's there anyway. So yeah.
Vinyl is also, you know, since 2000 has made an enormous comeback. It went all the way below 1 million in sales in around 2000, and now it's gone up and up and up. And as someone that loves vinyl, and I have a lot of friends that are vinyl collectors, and we spend a lot of time on Discogs and stuff, we appreciate this. We really appreciate the packaging is important. It's important to me. Liner notes are important to me, you know.
I agree.
I mean, I know I was talking to Curtis over at Tang Records not too long ago. He's putting out Outlets. I don't know if you ever heard of the Outlets. They're a Boston band.
Of course I know that. That's great. That's
Rick Barton ended up in the Dropkicks from the Outlets. He's doing that, and I was talking to him about liner notes and stuff. So I was like really excited that he's going to do that, you know.
That's great.
I think every label that does that is good. Now you guys are the way you did your packaging is on another level, and I hope to keep doing it. I know it's going to be costly.
Well, it's costly, but it's also like we try to keep our records to $30 or less to the public, and so there's a profit point that we're not, you know, if you're real, we're not. That's when I talk about us being a nonprofit label, like the records we're putting out there, they're really $60 records. If they came out through a major label, they'd be a $60 record, because the 7 Seconds, especially, is a gatefold with a book inside and 7-inch slid inside. So, but we look at it as like, okay, you know, one of the joys about being in this label is some of the people I get to work with. So I talk with Ian MacKay quite a bit as a sounding board. You know, I'm always like, well, what would Ian do? Like, let me reach out to Ian. So Ian, well, like, how would you handle that? And he's, you know, like, we try to keep this in the spirit of what it is, which is like, if you're a kid going to buy a Circle Jerks record, we don't want you paying $60. We'd rather eat the money ourselves for you to get the record, because at the end of the day, like, you know, we're only talking, you know, let's say the average of about 10,000 units we're trying to sell per some of these records, which isn't, it's really, if you know the business, that's really good. It's not like something like it's a great number, but it's also not, you're not going to make millions of dollars.
Right.
And so that's kind of also the point when I talk about the streaming. We look at these vinyl releases of vinyl, such a great format to show the art and show photos blown up and really celebrate the music. But the end game is that's really trying to, it's almost like this is the handbook for the digital world. So like, I'm guessing a lot of kids aren't going to pop on the record, you know, maybe they will, but for the most part, they'll always have that book
you want that to sit on your shelf.
Yeah, you want this to be something.
It's an art piece.
Yes, exactly.
It's funny how much things haven't really changed, because you reminded me in 1987, I called Ian MacKay up and asked him if he was going to be upset if I signed Dag Nasty to my label, because, you know, they put their first 2 records on Discord. So
yeah.
I mean, that's a guy that you have to, like, you know.
You have to, yeah. If you get Ian's stamp of approval, it's
right,
like you're feeling okay. But, you know, that's like I said, like guys like Ian and Keith Morris. I mean, I knew Keith Morris a little bit, but what a beautiful human being. And like, just like someone I just treasure now. Like working with him is like being his label and helping him get these 2 records out and helping him with this tour that's gone so well. And just seeing him have this real moment of celebration. Like, that's the whole, I mean, that's the point of the label, right? Because like these guys, Keith Morris, Kevin Seconds, Ian, Al Baril, like when I say music saved my life,
they started it.
Those are the guys that we leaned on as a confused teenager. You know, you find Ian MacKay's lyrics as a 13-year-old kid, you've done okay. Like you found a great home and a great path and a great mentor, even though you don't realize he's your mentor at 13. Like this guy's not going to let you down.
Yeah, these guys are the real legends of
the real deal, man.
punk.
They're just the real,
I'm very interested in hearing how the deal for SSD, Kids Will Have Their Say, came about, and how long, I can't wait to hear this. How long did it take you to get this deal
Years.
going?
It
Yeah.
took years, Steve. And this is, you'll appreciate this being from boss, being out there in Massachusetts. It's like, so Al, I didn't know Al Brill. I obviously know who he is. And we were friends on Facebook, but friends in the sense that like, hey, we're connected. We're not really friends. Maybe, maybe we talked a couple times. He reached out to me a couple years ago and said he was interested in SSDs, Kids Will Have Their Say, and Get It Away, re-releasing them. He talked to some labels, and Keith Morris had recommended us. And so we were like,
Wow.
what? Of course. And he goes, I'm surprised, this is great. He goes, I'm surprised you hadn't reached out to me. And I was like, look, Al, I don't know you, but your reputation, like, or the mythology behind you, you're this kind of brooding, like dark lord. And he's not dark lord in the sense of evil, but you're just like the shadow figure that we know is there, but like, we don't know. And the way he's always conducted his business, he doesn't seem like doesn't seem like he's a reunion guy. He doesn't seem like he's never come across to me as a guy who's that interested in the past or had been before. So we have this great conversation. Me and Matt have a conversation with him. We offer him a deal we think is fair. And he's like, yeah, I don't know. That's not really what I was thinking. And then he's like, SSD has more value than I think you're giving it. And he's not wrong, because when we do these evaluations, I don't mind just explaining the math. Is, at this point, I kind of do a projection, right? So I'm like, okay, the digital streaming is just extra income. If we're going to make 10,000 records, what would that mean? And how much is that worth? And if whatever that is, then we're trying to buy 51% of that master, because we do have to own for administration purposes, but that's the point of this label. So then we kind of do the math with SSD and a couple and whatever that came out to, and we gave it to Al, and he was like, well, I think SSD has more worth than just commercial value. And I'm like, Matt and I are like, he's not wrong. That's not wrong, because SSD is a pillar. And we know as a label, you can get SSD on your label. That opens some eyes, right? Like that gets some people who are like, wait a second, SSD trusts these guys? Like, no pun intended with the name, but like these guys might be the label. He balks at the deal. And then we offer him a couple of deals, but we just become friends. So like, I love the dude. So like, we probably talked for every couple weeks, we probably talked for an hour. And I would always call him as I have a warehouse down in Santa Ana for Trust that I live in downtown LA. So it's about an hour drive. Right. And I know Al, I was like, he's a talker. So I'm like, all right, I got an hour. We get on the phone with Al. We talk about sports. We talk about, whatever's going on. We never really talk about the label. He's asking questions all the time. Now, if you know anything about Al, he's super, he's got that thick accent, but he is a smart fucking dude, man.
Yeah, he is.
Like he's just a smart, perceptive dude. So the whole time we're having these conversations, he is putting together, he's filing the data, he's analyzing, he's trying to learn about us, he's asking all these questions. Beginning of the year 2022, this year, I hit him up first couple weeks of the year. I go, look, we're going to give you our best offer. We're going to give another offer to you. We're going to put our best foot forward. And we went back to the drawing board and we put some extra value into those records, just because we were like, by now we had a little money in the piggy bank. And we're like, you know what, man, if we could get Circle Jerks and SSD, like those are two pillars. Like, I don't know how, everyone's got a different Mount Rushmore, but I'm putting Keith Morris and Al's, depending on the genre.
Yeah,
like,
they're up there.
Yeah, they're forefathers. So, and then he was happy. And I know he's had reservations, not anymore, but there are a couple times I talk him off the ledge where he's like having second thoughts. And I'm like, and I think he has when I say he has second thoughts, I don't think he doesn't believe in us. I think it's one of those things with him. It's like, this is a guy who's never 40 years that record's been on print. He never put it in print. And so he's now going to make that move. And that's a big jump.
It sure is.
For a guy like that. But I just know, I mean, I tell all these guys, you included, anyone from the East Coast who loves that band, like, we're all in this together with that release. That's one of those releases I'm like, like 7 Seconds, I know them so well. And that was a band Kevin and I have been friends for years. I've seen that band. SSD, I only saw him once in LA, and I told Al it wasn't great. It was like,
were you at the Olympic Auditorium show?
I was at the Olympic when
Suicidal?
I think it was Suicidal, and Keith maybe sang for Red Hot Chili Peppers. I know
I
who
was
Red Hot Chili
there.
Peppers
I
were.
was at that show.
You were?
I was at that
Yeah.
show, and I was horrified when SSD came out and did a
Oh.
rock set. I was like, what the fuck are they doing?
What
And
are they
somehow they
doing?
got out of there. Somehow they got out of that building in like one piece, which is kind of a miracle. But
People were not stoked. But the thing about Al is like, and this is what I kind of love about him and those guys. He's just like, we were already like, that was the record we're touring on. We didn't want to play those songs, and they didn't kind of give a fuck what people thought. So they were just doing it. As a kid going to see SSD, it wasn't that great for me personally, but doesn't really matter because
it was
like,
rough.
It was, but yeah, but I mean,
congratulations though. That's a major,
well, like that's a huge feather in our cap.
Major.
Not to be those guys patting ourselves on the back, but that's a big one for us, a big record for us.
You've said in other interviews that I've watched and listened to that you have as many as 100 records that you would like to. You use the word 100.
Yeah.
Where do you stand with those hefty goals, and do you have any other things in the bag already that you could tell us before I let you go?
So sure, yeah. So when Matt and I were doing this label, we actually came with 150. What are the classic titles? First it was 150 punk rock. So there's Discharge and Exploited, GBH. And then I kind of whittled that down to more American based. Now, even though we will put out SNFU records soon, because we do.
Oh, cool.
Part of BYO, and those SNFU records are some of my favorites. And so those will come out. But the basic structure of the label, we start thinking, okay, like to really do it justice and to have a chance to, the end game is to maybe get this into a museum space one day or donate our shares to the Smithsonian, or, Matt works on some of these boards of these kind of, those kind of things, museum spaces and stuff. So the idea is once we have enough of a, history or enough of a label, we'll donate. We would like to donate that to a space that we know would be almost like public record, and they'll protect it because that's how we view it. So that being said, like, yeah, I kind of whittled that down to 100, but anyone you can think of now, obviously Discord's not going to sell to us, and that's okay, because it's also, we want these labels to exist. So like Touch and Go and Discord, there's some labels that just seem like they're fine and will be fine. But, I'm not shy to admit it. Like we would buy SST from Greg Ginn in a second, whatever's left on it, we would do it. I would love to work with the Bad Brains. We've had, little bit conversations, but nothing major, but there's nothing you can't think of in that space that we're not interested in, and have the ambition to get there eventually, whether it's, it's not to us, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So even things we strike out on, we're still going to come back to in a couple of years and try to get when we have a better storytelling. I think that's probably why SSD worked, because when I talked to Al, we just put out one record, the Circle Jerks, Group Sex, and now he's kind of seeing what we do, and he's more comfortable with it. And that I think will happen hopefully with some other artists, but anything you can think of, we're talking. I mean, you and I talked about a record, Dag Nasty Field Day, you worked on when you were with Giant. That's a tough one. That's a tough one to figure out.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't own those masters.
Yeah, I wish you did, because then we could work with you.
Yeah, me too. You wouldn't believe it. You're not the first person that has called me about the Field Day record. This has been going on for like 15 years. A lot of people want that record. Well, it's a very popular record.
But also, like, there's government issue records, there's a Uniform Choice record. There's a bunch of stuff that in that world that it's hard to tell based on the bankruptcy of Dutch East India and what happened to the founders and stuff, like where those really sit as far as like the legality of who owns the masters. And with us, everything we have to do is button up, because like I just mentioned, if we're going to ever donate this to someone like, say, the Smithsonian, which is our high bar, well, they're not going to take stuff that we don't have legal proof that we own.
Yeah, you don't want a lawsuit coming your way.
No, and that's another thing too, is we don't want litigation. But I also want to get my hands on those records. And I have talked to Brian Baker and Pete Kortner and Doug about Field Day, and we have a deal in place if we could ever figure out how to get the rights.
Yeah, I would, like I told you before, I wish I could help you with that, but the owner of Dutch East India is, some people think they know where he is, but he's not really being cooperative about anything.
Just to tell you a quick funny story for you, I right after we talked, I think it was about a year ago, we were talking about that record.
Yeah.
I went down a rabbit hole chasing that dude. And I'm pretty sure at one point I had to Google earth, a Google Maps picture of his house and his car in the driveway of his house. And I'm like, this is where this guy lives. But it doesn't do me any good.
Yeah, I know.
Well,
I don't think he,
anyway.
I don't know
I mean,
what.
we're in it to win it, man. And that's a record that, you know,
Yeah.
we'll figure that out eventually, man.
I can't wait till we get to the point where you're releasing that, because I know I'm gonna.
You'll be part of it for sure. We will need.
I'm gonna want to do something because I got all the good stories about that.
I want to do a podcast where I can interview you about signing that band, because that's
it's a good story, man. It's a really good story.
I bet.
Hey, Joe, thanks a lot for taking the time to come and talk to me, man. I appreciate it.
Oh, Steve, I appreciate you reaching out, man. It's just a pleasure to talk to you.
And I love what you guys are doing. So you have my 100% support. And with guys like Gitter calling me to help me, how can you say no, you know?
Of course. And I'll just leave you on this. Like that's the part of what I love about this is we all get it. So we're all in this together. We all look at, like, Trust Records is like, yes, I might be running it per se, but I feel like everyone should have their fingerprints on it, and that's what's fun for me. It's fun for Matt. It's fun for the bands to have people like yourself, Gitter, participate in these projects, you know, like it just makes it better.
Well, I can't wait to see what's down the road. It's going to be a lot of fun, man.
Yep. I appreciate it, man.
All right. Thanks a lot.
All right, Steve, have a good one.
Hey, Joe.
Bye.